Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 13th of June 2023. I had my fifth COVID injection yesterday because I'm in the vulnerable category. I had, you like this, I had stem cell therapy back in 2019, so I'm a bit immunosuppressed from my multiple sclerosis. I had it in Moscow of all places, and that's a whole other story. Anyway, I'm struggling to walk today and my brain is a bit like mush, so I do apologize. Second thing to say is that today's show is brought to you by the word liberation. What is the definition of liberation? Freedom from limits on thought or behavior. That's one way we can see liberation. Just see if that is I don't know, an idea that permeates through the tabs, the gazillion tabs I have for you. Right. Okay. We're going to start with second start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. And we are seeing fairly low figures again today, as we saw yesterday. Twitter seems to have changed some programs, so I can't zoom in on the image. I'm going to have to zoom in on the Twitter page. Sorry about that. That's really weird. That's happened across all the tabs, so there's something weird going on. Anyway, 470 liquidated personnel. That is going back to what we were seeing, before this phase of the counteroffensive began. 4 tanks, 6 APVs, armored personnel vehicles, 20 artillery systems. So that's a high number. The Ukrainians are still really focusing on artillery systems. They are the bane of the Ukrainians in terms of, that together with artillery, together with drone spotting. I mean, one can't really be useful without the other. So I think Ukrainians have really struggled to get rid of small drones in the air, and that has allowed artillery to be really active. Although they have obviously taken out an awful lot of artillery before this counter-offensive phase started and during it too. One anti-aircraft warfare system, one helicopter that has been lost in the area. It's a Ka-52 attack helicopter, 2 drones, two vehicles and fuel tanks. That's virtually nothing. Remember, that's up and down the whole line. Some people are saying yesterday the drop in figures could well have been because it was a Monday, which is after Sunday, and I generally would agree. But now I'm not so sure. I don't know. The last couple of days have certainly been quieter. One piece of special equipment. Is that because there's just slightly more positional fighting taking place after the initial incursion or the initial attacks into the occupied territory? I don't know. Anyway, Ukrainian soldiers have destroyed another enemy attack helicopter, Ka-52. That was recorded in the General Staff figures, as you saw. General Staff say, against the background of the successful combat operations of the defense forces of Ukraine and due to the significant losses of the enemy in manpower in the temporarily occupied territories of the Luhansk region, the number of desertions in the Storm Z assault unit, Storm Z. So these are the mainly convict assault units that they have created, but they are seeing quite a lot of desertion. So the number of desertions in the Storm Z assault units of the Russian occupied forces, which are increasingly leaving combat positions on their own accord, has increased. The desertion of about 25 Russian occupiers in Mariupol and Novoazovsk was also noted due to the unofficial termination of vacations that were promised to the occupiers by the Russian military leadership. So we have also seen video evidence of large-scale sort of running away. This is near Klishchivka. Klishchivka is near the canal, Donbass Canal, and we can see here that the Russians are not a big fan of hanging around and getting hammered by artillery and whatnot. So here they are in their trenches, and artillery is hammering their positions. So they do a runner. I don't know if this qualifies as desertion, though they are. Well, this is desertion. They're crossing the canal, and that looks like this is south to north, and they're crossing the canal. See, they would be on the other side of the canal, I would have thought, unless this is from a few days back when the Ukrainians took positions on the west of the canal. That could well be desertion into Ukrainian territory. So anyway, that is that. So as a result of missile attack on the 12th, so that's yesterday, a Russian Major General, Sergei Goryachev, Chief of Staff of the 35th Combined Arms Army, was killed. So this has been announced by the Russians themselves. Today, there were reports about a missile attack on Primorsk. Maybe there is a connection between the two events, maybe not. Maybe we'll get more information a bit later. Well, this is significant because that was where I believe the 35th Combined Arms Army headquarters, I think, were. So they've been hitting these quite often hotels and nice buildings in occupied territories in safe places or previously safe places like Henichesk, which is the top of Crimea, top of the Arabat Spit. That was made the headquarters of the Kherson region because Kherson itself was obviously in Ukrainian hands. So they moved that to Henichesk because it was safe. It was away from HIMARS range. It was out of HIMARS range. But of course, since the Ukrainians have had Storm Shadows, to these cruise missiles to fire at the Russians, they've been hammering otherwise safe places. So you've had these accumulations of troops, accumulations of commanders, commander control centers, equipment, so on and so forth. And the Ukrainians have taken full advantage of suddenly getting pretty much everything in range. The governor of Belgorod reports Shebekino is under attack again now, and there have been various other reports of shelling in the region this morning. So it was yesterday. Shelling is said to have hit Vyazovo village, while they claim drones attack Graveron. So Graveron was where the volunteer Russian forces attacked at the end of May. I'm going to talk about this, I think, in my extra video today. Talk a little bit about these guys being a bit dodgy. Some of the Russian somebody asked me a question in my thread a couple of times and said, can you really answer this? And I only really got to look at the question today, and it's a good question. It's a good moral question about, well, should we be supporting these guys if these are sort of Nazi ne'er-do-wells, kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. So a bit of a moral quagmire to work our way through. And then so here's the example of a place being hit. Before and after pics of the resort hotel where Russian soldiers set up base. I can totally believe that there were wounded and dead there. Yet another big strike from Russian forces in Zaporizhia. This time it happened in Primorsk, Sonyachna, in a holiday resort there. So that is a significant hit. That tab should have been one tab back to support the previous one. Okay. Now, here's another bit of footage of an FPV drone taking out T-80 tanks. So it's 2 days in a row. The reason why I think this is significant is because you're now able to take out significant pieces of equipment with FPV drones. And I'm pretty sure this is a different piece of footage. So this is another T-80 taken out by FPV. FPVs are cheap, easy to make. And if they can take out significant armor, then actually that leaves Russian armor really vulnerable to these sorts of attacks. They are easy, they are quick, they've got fairly decent range, and this tank certainly has some serious cooking off. It starts now, and there you go. Big fire there. Turret is the barrel is smoking. And and then it gets a bit more fundamental. There we go. Anyway, just to show that these FPV drones with the RPG-7 warheads on them are becoming a real nuisance for the Russians. The Russians are starting to use them on the Ukrainian side as well. Russians are bragging about destroying this howitzer with a Lancet. This is nothing unusual. What's interesting, though, about this particular howitzer is that it is yet another decoy. The Ukrainians seem to be using decoys quite effectively at the moment. So it goes and takes out that bit of kit. And as you can see, some of the detritus flies off really quite far. And that usually indicates that it's not made entirely of metal, as bits fly quite far back. It doesn't look like metal. It's like white there. Anyway, you go further down, and it was basically a decoy. So the Ukrainians, that's not the first time we've seen decoys in the last couple of days. They're using them effectively. Right, another strike here. This actually happened a couple of days ago, I think, was it? But I missed this one. Unclear if the same boat, but Ukraine's Kherson region's governor now said 3 civilians died and 10 people were wounded, including 2 law enforcement officers operating the boat. A 74-year-old man used his body to shield a woman from Russian fire, but was hit and died. So this is Again, this is liberation, isn't it? A flooded village. Now, either option here is morally terrible. So you are rescuing people. There's no military activity taking place in a place that's completely flooded and all you can see the roofs. So there's no military activity taking place. So either you are indiscriminately firing shells into a flooded village for really horrific reasons, or you are targeting emergency services saving people on purpose. If this is an accident, it's morally reprehensible, and if it's on purpose, it's morally reprehensible. Just taking out boats, saving people um, in from dying from flooding, it's just don't know. Liberation. A big blazing oil refinery in Krasnodar. So Krasnodar is the other side of the Kerch Bridge in Russian territory. Officials say a column of processing diesel caught fire. Yeah, it's just spontaneously combusted. And another big fire, this time in St. Petersburg, an industrial enterprise reportedly caught fire. I do wonder if you add up all of these fires that are taking place in Russia and have done for months and months, and I've reported so many of them, I wonder what the total damage has been caused and the total disruption that has been caused by them. It'd be interesting to know. But anyway, that is a significant fire in St. Petersburg. Okay, let's go on. I had to split my tabs up a little bit. I just had too many. So this is continuing the kind of hits and losses. But one of the biggest things that happened last night was there were cruise missiles sent across from Russia. So Ukrainian air defenses downed 11 missiles and one drone. That's 11 out of 14 KH-101 and KH-555 cruise missiles fired by the Russian forces, and one out of the four drones, I believe. So where they did get through, Kharkiv, I think, got hit possibly by drones. We know that Kryvyi Rih was badly hit, and I think Dnipropetrovsk maybe. I think Ternopil right over in the west as well. This was a really bad hit. There's now 6 people have died in this hit on Kryvyi Rih. Uh, there's again, I would say this is just inexcusable, right? It's terrible. These are residential buildings being taken out by cruise missiles, and the destruction is pretty significant. It is a bit of a hellscape, and there's so much footage coming out of this. It's just really, it's not a good look, and you've got to feel for those people living there. Again is this liberation. Uh, the destruction seems to be, I mean, either they aimed for residential buildings or they're using the wrong missiles, or I mean, you could say this might have been a missile taken down by air defenses, but it seems to have had its full explosive capability here. So either way, it ain't good, Russia. This is someone else saying, well, a resident on the Russian cruise missile attack on Kryvyi Rih tonight. Quote: "This is the Russian world for you guys. You're in your effing bed, 3:30 a.m., and you have effing nothing. A flat, no car, and over there people are dying. Just yeah, it's not great." 5-story apartment block hit in the town centre. You got windows blown out all over the shop, so on and so forth. Lots of footage coming out of that. And then Kharkiv was also hit by Shahed drones. Again, it appears, at least the claims are, mainly residential areas, but also that Kharkiv has been hit by cannon artillery, so tubed artillery, multiple launch rocket system, mortars, and aircraft as well, firing usually the FOB 500 style bombs, glide bombs there. So it is not pleasant in Kharkiv at the moment. So that's what's been happening overnight in terms of hits and losses. We'll move on to look at a few bits of partisan activity. So in Melitopol, a diesel locomotive was blown up, which the Russians used to transport fuel to the front, the mayor said. According to detailed information, today's night explosion destroyed an enemy diesel locomotive in the locomotive depot. Russians use equipment to transfer fuel to the front. And there we have an image of that. That's fairly significant. That happened yesterday. And indeed, there has been a number of hits on logistics, but also a number of pieces of partisan activity. Belgorod this time, so this is within Russia. Russia admits 2 kamikaze drones attacked a freight train on Saturday evening. I reported at the time of the accident in Alexeyevsky that 15 wagons had derailed, which Russia says were empty. The tracks were also damaged. This kind of activity is super important for. I mean, Russia is a railway army. They're going to be, given that they are in defensive mode with a Ukrainian counteroffensive. They are going to be moving an awful lot of stuff around, and they'll be doing that predominantly by rail. And that's why Ukraine are going to great ends to take out railway infrastructure, as well as partisans doing this too. So, railway partisans, Crimea's rail connection with mainland occupied Ukraine was targeted in a string of attacks on the 10th to the 12th of June. 4 presumably partisan rail attacks took place in Russian or occupied territories. 1 destroyed main railway connecting Crimea and Zaporizhia. So there, as you can see there was a bridge in Yakimivka, that's just south of Melitopol. There's another, looks like a railway hit there in Kirovskoye, and then up in Bryansk or Belgorod region up there. Not sure which one. That looks like Belgorod actually. And also, I think Jankoy was hit, which is, I don't know whether that's a military target hit in Jankoy, but it's also a railway hub that's, the railway from the north coming down through Crimea goes through Jankoy. So Jankoy is often a target for the Ukrainians. Okay, let's go on to other bits and pieces. So here we have reports of an uprising in Donetsk. Pro-Ukraine partisan group Atesh says 3 military instructors have been killed as convict soldiers rioted and stole a truck and weapons. So this is going back to the kind of desertion idea as well from these Storm Z assault groups. It could be connected. This is going to be challenging for the Russians going forward if there is more and more of this. That kind of gets more widespread. Now, I showed you a video yesterday in my extra of barrier troops. These are these troops that shoot retreating soldiers from their own side. So Russian troops shooting Russian troops. So it's the idea that and this happened in Bakhmut supposedly quite a bit. So if you're going to run forward and attack the enemy, there's a really high percentage chance of dying. But if you stay still, you're going to be hit by IEDs from drones above, a really high chance of dying. And if you run backwards and sort of run away, you're going to be shot by your own troops, the barrier troops. So you've got a really high chance of dying. So, what do you do? And then some people, and even myself yesterday, showing that video, I watched it like 20 times in a row thinking, is this definitely kosher? Is this a PSYOPs video? Is it being created by the Ukrainians? It could well have been done. I think it's like a 60-40, I think it's kosher. I did look at how the bodies moved, all that kind of stuff. When they were shot, did it look like someone acting? It's quite a long distance away. You can't see the full details like you want to. It sounds pretty horrific, but I'm trying to work out the veracity of that video. But you've got here's a Russian prison war saying that if they tried to escape, the Russian barrier units would kill them. I mean, we know it's been claimed time and time again. We know it's happening, and a video comes out. Yeah, it might be psyops, it might not, but this stuff happens, right? Or at the very least, the Russians believe it happens. So general stuff. Forced issue of Russian passports. This is one of these liberation stories for citizens of Ukraine in Melitopol, Zaporizhia region continues. Thus, Russians are actively threatening the parents of graduates about the impossibility of obtaining school leaving certificates in case of refusal by teenagers to obtain a Russian passport. So just the English is a bit garbled there. The idea is that they are mailing people into having Russian passports. Everyone has to have a Russian passport, and then they're basically naturalized Russians. They're not Ukrainians. It's just a way for them to force everyone to become Russian. Say you're not going to get your diploma, you're not going to get your school leaving certificates or whatever, unless you take Russian passports on, unless your family takes Russian passports on. And, because that's what liberation looks like, right? What's that definition again? Let's just have a look. Freedom from limits of thoughts or behavior. Interesting. Okay. So moving on. We have Ukraine's intelligence says Russia is again laying explosives which would lead to another catastrophe if they're used. The warning surrounds the Crimean Titan plant in Armyansk, northern Crimea. 200 tons of ammonia are used in refrigeration there, which could poison a wide area. Arguably, this is what they did in Novokakhovka at the dam there. there are supposedly munitions planted, explosives planted in the nuclear power plant, and I think that's been pretty much ratified or verified by the IEAI, is it? International Atomic Energy Association. Them anyway. So you know, par for the course, I guess, but it's it's not good. Right, another danger of Russia's terrorism in Odessa. So, following the Great Flood, two Anchor River mines were washed ashore 100 kilometers apart. One was blown up by the military. The other saw a lucky escape for a resident who thought it was a gas canister and took it home. And there it is, just down at the bottom there. You just imagine taking a naval mine home. Hey, should we? Do you know how to get into this? Get some gas out. We could heat the oven with that. Let's try it out. That's heating the oven for sure. Yes, so it's a lucky escape. The SSU liquidated a bot farm in Venetia, which created up to 500 fake accounts every day to disperse Kremlin narratives. Now, I go and check out my video on bots and trolls. We often call, and I'm victim of this. I'm sorry, I am. I do this quite often. I call Russian trolls bots quite a lot, but actually, technically, they're not bots. Bots are autonomous kind of bits of algorithm code and whatnot that simulate people and do stuff like videos and like this or share that. So here you can see you've got these are each kind of like bots. Specialized equipment allows criminals to register up to 500 anonymous accounts in various social networks every day, including those banned in Ukraine. According to the case file, the Russian clients of the bot farm used fake accounts for mass dispersal of pro-Kremlin narratives, in particular regarding the situation at the front and the socio-political situation in Ukraine. In other words, you know, when you get people liking stuff on Twitter and bumping it up and sharing it on Twitter, at the same time, by the way, this is coming out at the moment. I've been following Jake Bro. So Jake Bro is another YouTuber that does this kind of stuff. He has been shadow banned. Twitter has, because he reports on Ukraine. This is the only kind of explanation. He reports on Ukraine. They've shadow banned him as being inappropriate content, and you have to be over 18 or whatever. Uh, so you can't find him. It's called kind of shadow banning. You're not like fully banned. You can still post, but you think everyone can find you, and you can't, and they can't. And he's analyzed his data, and it's completely dropped off. So he's been effectively banned by Twitter without being banned. And the same has happened to Thomas Tyner. Kremlin levels of gaslighting here. Twitter shadow banned me for reporting about Ukraine. If you don't follow me already, you won't find me in a search for my username or name. Accurate information source equals only info sourced from the Kremlin. In other words, I mean, this is happening to a lot of pro-Ukrainian voices. I don't know if it's happening to Russian voices, but it seems very much like Twitter is favoring the Russian narrative here in a very overt way. So this is something of a problem. You add that together with bots being rife on social media, then yeah, it's all a bit of a problem. Now, I think this is a significant piece of footage. This is Shoigu, the defense minister, and Putin for the awards. I don't know where this was, but yesterday was their like national awards there, I think. Look at the body language here. Look at Shoigu try to speak to Putin and look and see what Putin does. This is absolutely incredible. Apart from the music is not incredible. That was poor show. So he walks in, tries to speak to him, literally turns his back. Look at Shoigu's face. How embarrassing! He literally turned his back on Shoigu, and it's just insane. Standing right next to him. What does Shoigu do? Oh goodness, that's embarrassing. And these will all be military people. I would have thought they're handing out, I presume, awards to injured military people there. And he's just turned his back on him, and that tells you all you need to know about what's going on in the Ministry of Defence. Right, let's go on to what's happening on really quickly on the front line. Not a huge amount, actually. Kenneth Gregg, take it with a pinch of salt. What he says occasionally comes up with some nuggets. I put some pretty good news. Officially, we use a third of our forces at this stage of the offensive. I don't know if that is good news. I'd say, goodness me, that's a lot of them. And I thought these were only smaller attacks. So Yeah, the Russians in turn have used 90%, so this is a good news part, of their resources in Ukraine concentrated in the Zaporizhia region. As we've expanded recaptured ground in Novodorivka and Makarivka since the last update, the Russian troops in Rivnopil are now in great danger of being trapped. There is only one way out of this area, and it runs parallel to the current front line. The units in Rivnopil now have very little chance of receiving supplies. Was this a plan of General Staff from the beginning? There is a lot of evidence of that right now. We are now able to recapture 60 square kilometers without fighting. When this happens, we have flattened the front line in the area and crossed both the contact line and the first line of defense. We also see that the Russians have started taking people from the second and third line of defense to try and fill the gaps. This in turn means that their last two lines of defense are weakened. The tendency I see is that the Russians are slowly but surely beginning to crumble, and then they have excessive losses to be in defense. And he says, making some advance in Bakhmut as well. Okay. The claim is from the General Staff that 7 villages are fully liberated, 90 square kilometers of territory, advancing up to 6.5 kilometers deep into Russian occupied territory. Yesterday, there were these claims of all of these villages being taken. And so we already had Neskuchna, Storozheve, Bladatne, Makarivka, and then these contested ones, Staromoilsky and Uruzhany to the south. Well, the claims from the Russians were that they went on a counterattack and retook Makarivka. So if we look at Rybar. Current situation in Zaporizhia, Makarivka is back under Russian control. This is from this morning. So Rybar, the pro-Russian source, saying Makarivka is under Russian control. They've retaken it. I think we can all agree that this has been a major underperformance by the Ukrainians in light of their stated goals. There's still the possibility of a breakthrough occurring, especially if an all-out offensive is committed to. This will be extremely risky, however, considering the Ukrainians still haven't met a major defensive line yet. And then everyone's just saying you're totally wrong. Not least Wargonzo, who's super Russian military blogger. Russian mill blogger Wargonzo reports that Russian forces failed to retake Makarivka today. So someone's wrong. Contrary to forecasts, quote, contrary to forecasts, it was not possible to recapture the village by the end of the day. We hope that tomorrow our attempts in this direction will be crowned with success. And in general, it's time to understand that this is from Wargonzo, that this section of the front is not as successful for us as Orikhiv, which is much further to the west, where the Ukrainians had lost all that equipment. In the Orikhiv direction, there is an advance of the enemy, and it will not be possible to deny it, no matter how much you call the blue zone grey. By drawing non-existent advances, we are doing ourselves a disservice by risking our own front. In other words, he's saying, stop lying about this. We're in a bit of trouble in that particular area. And then you get, lots of video footage geolocated to Makarivka of the 137th Battalion of the 35th Marine Brigade taking Makarivka. I mean, all sorts of footage. I mean, it is.
З їхніх слів,
As you can see, lots of footage there, including being literally in Makarivka, so on and so forth. That's quite a line of equipment too. So in Makarivka is not going to be a big place. I don't think Russians have taken that back, or if they have, they were subsequently beaten back out of it. So I would believe Wargonzo and all of the Ukrainian sources over Rybar there. Okay, military aid. US is providing up to $325 million in more military aid for Ukraine, a defense official tells VOA, Voice of America, in a package expected to be announced tomorrow. PDA to include Strikers and Bradleys that can replace damaged and destroyed munitions for NASAMS and HIMARS. Sorry, it can replace those damaged and destroyed and munitions for NASAMS and HIMARS. Now, Bradley's is an interesting one. So this guy, because loads of the Russians have been saying, "Oh my goodness, 13 Bradleys or 18 Bradleys or whatever it is have been taken out already in this counteroffensive. Oh my goodness, the Ukrainians are terrible. They've lost all this equipment." Actually, they don't seem to have lost that many troops. Most of the destroyed or the disabled Bradleys and whatnot that we've seen have had troops getting out of them and surviving. One of the big things that's come out of this is the survivability of the Western equipment. Anyway, this guy says plenty of M2 Bradleys to replace losses in Ukraine. We have a surplus. People talk like they're exquisite weapon systems available in tiny numbers or something. Losing a dozen or so in the first week of hitting a reinforced Russian front, hundreds of miles long, is a win, not a loss. I don't know if it's a win, but I get the point. It's not nearly as bad as people say. I think the public thinks they are rare or something because a decision to send them was such a long, high-profile ordeal. This is a really good point, but that was not because we have a small numbers of them available. It was mainly a geopolitical one, not one of supply. Ukraine is not the first country that we have given them to either. What Ukraine needs, seems to need more than anything, is surprise, surprise, highly mobile SHORADs, so air defense systems. Final thought: the Bradleys appear to have done their job largely in saving the crews and occupants once knocked out. These trained troops can live to fight another day in another Bradley. The operators are arguably far more scarce than the vehicles. Forgot to add this: it seems like a lot of those making claims about this issue have never talked to armor folks. US armor, even with the benefit from its combined arms extravaganza, can suffer heavy losses in advanced training, especially effing breaching operations. We are brainwashed to think we can just steamroll any battlefield problem with minimal losses. That's not reality. The armor fight is tough. Without air support, it's effing tough. This is absolutely correct, right? And on the numbers front, it is really worth looking at those numbers. So let's look at the Bradleys here. So the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. This is the American stocks of these, 6,723. UK have like a couple stored in a drawer. We've got a couple of APCs in a drawer and maybe one under the sofa. Uh, US, I mean, this is why we go on so much about the US. They're like the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk of you know armies. So they've got 6,723 Bradleys, and these are being phased out pretty much. And you got older variants of Bradleys, so they're just sitting in warehouses. How many M1 Abrams tanks? 8,848. It's just phenomenal numbers. And when you go down, you look at the M113, 6,000 M113. Yeah, they're old, but they got a lot. Strikers, 4,187. Amphibious assault vehicles, 1,311. LAV 25s. These are other APCs, 1,500 amphibious ones. Lark CV, 200. Well, those ones are planned. And then, you keep going down, all these other vehicles. Cougar, Max Pro, 5,250 have been ordered. I don't know how many they've got. Humvees, they've got like a gazillion, etc., etc. So the US really is in a position to be able to give these Bradleys to the US, given that they are to Ukraine, given that they are suffering some losses, as you would expect. So the attrition on the battlefield isn't that great. And imagine how Russians would feel knowing that we've done quite well, we've taken out some vehicles, and then the Americans just announced, yeah, we're going to give you another 200 or something. Yesterday, and I've got that here. So here, 76 Rochelle Senator, these APCs given by Canada that apparently already been delivered. They're just plonked into Ukraine, right? 76 decent APCs, and Russia going, oh my goodness, what have we got? What have we got coming? Like nothing. So this is that asymmetry between these two forces. Ukraine is able to draw on international support in such a way that must be demoralizing for the Russians, but also they can't win. They don't have the capacity to win militarily. It's just not going to happen. Germany is focusing on providing Ukraine with additional weapons as well as establishing hubs for repairing damaged equipment. Is that the same for Russia? Every time one of these bits of news is announced, the question should always be, and what's Russia? What does Russia get? What does Russia do? How are they coping? Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, announced this during a press conference in Paris, a meeting of the leaders of the Weimar Triangle. That is, I believe, Poland, France, and Germany. Here we have the MR2 Victor purchased from Czechia, so the Czech Republic, now kind of generally called Czechia, for Ukraine. These are basically autocannons on the back on a heavy machine gun mount on a Toyota Land Cruiser with day-night optics. Caliber Obscura, who's actually half of Ukraine Weapons Trackers, says is that these are really decent looking bits of kit because they've got huge stability on the back of these. So when they fire, you'll notice that the frame, the vehicle doesn't move at all. Just the vehicle is barely moving. You got this massive sort of set of autocannons firing. Look, none of those are moving. And he's saying that they're just really stable, and that's only a good thing. Anyway, they've got a bunch of those. Um, Denmark is donating $36 million worth of ammunition to Ukraine. And this is a significant contribution which Ukraine urgently needs, says a foreign minister of Denmark. Japan, and this is huge news. Actually, from military strategy point of view, from the geopolitical point of view, this is very significant. So the Japanese armed forces are basically changing they're going from a self-defense force to just a standard army, and they're looking at being able to. So they're looking at the defense industry. There is looking at everywhere else in the world, going, well, they're making money out of selling bits and pieces to there, and what are we doing? How are we going to survive if we can only build stuff for ourselves? So we need to export, and we need to think of our army more how it fits in geopolitically and internationally and globally rather than just us defending ourselves. And that was kind of a legacy of the Second World War. So Japan is increasing the production of military equipment and has given the green light to the export of military equipment. At a plenary session on June the 7th, a law was passed which aimed at increasing profits through exports and boosting competition in Japan's domestic market. So I don't know if that was this something that Budinov had mentioned. So that could mean, I don't know how quickly that might transfer into Ukraine getting some gear off Japan, but that might be a thing. I don't know if that's the hint that's being made there. Really significant though. Norwegian aid Ukraine are glad to announce 17 more donated emergency vehicles successfully delivered to Ukraine. Motorcade number 11 mission completed. This is fantastic. These organizations really helping out Ukraine. Again, did Russia have this luxury? The State Bureau of Investigation has handed over the seized cars of relatives of Medvedchuk and Kozak worth more than $1 million to the armed forces of Ukraine. This is reported on the SBI website. In particular, 12 trucks, a crane, a minibus, a van, and 2 SUVs were transferred. In other words, seized stuff from Russian oligarchs or people associated with Russia, seized in Ukraine and handed over to so who's it to the armed forces? Yeah, directly to the armed forces. So those trucks, they're going to be super useful, right, for logistics, of course, even though they're commercial trucks. It's things with wheels, right? Right. Big news in geopolitics. Silvio Berlusconi, who's a former prime minister of Italy, died yesterday. He was pretty ill. Last time I think he was seen, he made a press conference from hospital. He is the minor coalition partner in the right-wing nationalist government that when they came to power in Italy, people were worrying, genuinely worrying, and I talked about this myself, that they would more likely support Russia than Ukraine. Because actually, some of those people, Matteo Salvini, for example, and Berlusconi is like one of Putin's best mates, right? So when they're coming to power, it's like, well, it looked like it was going to be pretty obvious that Italy would support uh, Russia, but it turned out the exact opposite. So the actual Italian leader Meloni has been really strong on supporting Ukraine, and I guess kind of overruling the coalition partners. Berlusconi has been ill in hospital, so he's probably been less able to put a spanner in the works. And I mean, you look at his Reuters, Russia's Putin calls Berlusconi a dear, wise friend. This is yesterday, and statesman. So the reaction of Putin to his death. Quote, for me, Silvio was a dear person, a true friend. I have always sincerely admired his wisdom, his ability to make balanced, far-sighted decisions, even in the most difficult situations, Putin said in a message of condolence. Berlusconi will be remembered in Russia as a, quote, consistent and principled supporter of strengthening friendly relations between our countries, he said, Putin said. So like former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, Berlusconi cultivated close relations with Moscow during Putin's first years in the Kremlin from 2000 onwards. Both Berlusconi and Schröder became personal friends of the Russian leader and were criticized in the West for standing by him long after Russia's 2014 siege of Crimea from Ukraine. So that's really interesting. When the international community did not react strongly enough against Russia when Crimea was annexed, you've got leaders within Europe who were really pro Russia. I mean, Berlusconi was always in British press. He was always lambasted. He was never seen in good light at all in the UK. But obviously, certain Italians liked him. He was a media magnate, but he wasn't originally. He started off as not a double glazing salesman, something like that. She's got an interesting journey into politics, well, into media and then politics. And yeah, at the beginning of this war from 2022 onwards, I think he was receiving, didn't he receive a box of champagne or something, for a box of vodka from Putin with like a really obsequious note. I don't know. It was just, yeah. So they're good mates, but no longer. But he's passed away. So not that I'm glorifying the death of someone, but this will be of benefit. His death will be of benefit to Ukraine in that kind of geopolitical evaluation. Um, to say that as diplomatically as possible. Mondelez, the producer of Oreo, Toblerone, and dozens of other brands, is facing a widening corporate boycott in the Nordic region. I've had people on my threads tell me, "God, I'm in the supermarket and I see Toblerone or I see this, and I go, no." And it's like, excellent, glad that the information is disseminating effectively. In the Nordic region, over its continued presence in Russia, said it had asked to meet with the Norwegian government to protect its local business. The best way to protect it would be, get the hell out of Dodge, mate. Get out of Russia. Okay, France, Germany, and Poland. So we talked about this a little bit already. Promised long-term support for Ukraine while working on security guarantees. The Financial Times writes. These guys are meeting in Paris and they are discussing security guarantees. I was talking about this the other day, wondering what that would look like, because that normally means if Ukraine get attacked, then you send your troops to Ukraine. So I presume that will be a long-term plan. After this war is over, then you put them in place. But also, the important part here is long-term support. So Norway and Germany have already done this, as far as I understand, which is, we're not just giving you a bunch of armaments now. We're actually, say we're going to give you, I don't know, $10 billion worth of stuff. Actually, it's going to be $2 billion this year, $2 billion, so on and so forth. And that's 5 years of support. So actually thinking strategically in the long term about support for Ukraine rather than just ad hoc things right now, and that then gives a sustainable support to Ukraine. But it also sends a message to the Kremlin saying, "Oh my goodness, these guys they aren't going to get bored." It's saying to the Kremlin, we're in this for the long haul, and actually we've structured a support plan for Ukraine that is ongoing, longer than you envisage this war to go on, Putin. So, if you think we're going to get bored and we're going to run out of support for Ukraine, well, actually, this is kind of, we've contractually sorted this situation out so that we can't. And that's really, really important. Anyway, that's me for the news piece today. I hope my words were coherent. I'm struggling a bit. Anyway, take care, all the best, and I'll speak to you later.